I always imagined my baby's shower would be perfect. The delicate pink and blue decorations hanging from the ceiling, the mountain of gifts wrapped in shiny paper, and the smiles of everyone I loved gathered in one room. That was how it started, exactly as I'd dreamed. But dreams have a funny way of shattering when you least expect it. My name is Olivia, and 6 months ago, I was 7 months pregnant and engaged to the love of my life, Daniel. We'd been together for 5 years, high school sweethearts who had weathered college long distance and finally settled in our hometown. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but the moment we saw that positive test, Daniel dropped to one knee right there in our bathroom, still in his boxers, hair tousled from sleep. It wasn't romantic by conventional standards, but it was us. Pure and authentic. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said, pulling out a small velvet box from his drawer. "But I think this baby is telling us there's no time like the present." The ring was his grandmother's, a vintage sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Not the most expensive thing in the world, but it held generations of love. I said yes through tears and morning sickness, and just like that, we were planning both a wedding and a nursery. My best friend since kindergarten, Rebecca, threw herself into planning my baby shower. She insisted on handling everything: the venue, the guest list, the food, the games. I thought it was just her way of showing love. Now I realized she was carrying the weight of something far heavier than party decorations. The day of the shower arrived with perfect weather. One of those rare spring days where the temperature sits just right. I waddled into the community center's decorated hall and gasped. Rebecca had transformed the plain space into something magical. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, tables were adorned with wildflowers, my favorite, and a professional photographer snapped candids of arriving guests. In the corner stood Daniel, handsome in a blue button-down that matched his eyes, chatting with his brother Alex. What I didn't notice then, but what haunts my memories now, was Rebecca's brother Nate, standing awkwardly by the gift table, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Daniel. I didn't think much of his presence. He'd always been around growing up. He was Rebecca's older brother, the cool kid who sometimes let us hang out in his room listening to bands we were too young to appreciate. He'd moved away for work 4 years ago, but had recently returned to town after a divorce. I had barely seen him since his return, except for one dinner at Rebecca's place several months before. The shower progressed like any other. The ridiculous games where guests guessed my belly size using toilet paper, the advice for mom, cards that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate, the cooing over tiny onesies and booties. Everyone was laughing, the champagne, sparkling cider for me, was flowing, and my heart felt so full I thought it might burst. Then came time for the thank you speech. I stood awkwardly, my swollen feet protesting, and tapped a plastic spoon against my glass. The room quieted as I adjusted the microphone Rebecca had insisted we needed for proper documentation. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," I began, my voice wavering with emotion. "This baby is already so loved, and Daniel and I are overwhelmed by your generosity and support." I looked around the room, making eye contact with my mother, who was openly weeping. She'd been doing that since I announced the pregnancy. My future mother-in-law, who was beaming with pride. My college roommates, who had driven 3 hours to be here. And then I saw Rebecca, standing at the back of the room. Something was wrong. Her face had gone pale, her hands were shaking, and before I could finish my sentence about how blessed we were, she lurched forward. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice cracking. The room went silent, that awful, thick silence that feels like you could cut it with a knife. "Olivia, I'm so sorry." My first thought, absurdly, was that she had forgotten to order the cake. Something trivial. Something fixable. "The baby," she continued, each word seeming to physically pain her. "It's not Daniel's. It's Nate's." Have you ever felt the world actually stop? Not metaphorically, but physically felt the earth cease its rotation? The room tilted sideways, faces blurred, and a high-pitched ringing filled my ears. I looked at Daniel, hoping, praying, to see confusion or anger at such an absurd claim. Instead, I saw recognition, then devastation, then fury. Is this some kind of sick joke? I finally managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Rebecca was fully crying now, mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. That night, the dinner at my place, when Daniel got called into work and you stayed, Nate wasn't just visiting. You too. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if you find this story interesting, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let's continue. I couldn't process what she was saying. Dinner at her place? I counted back mentally, almost exactly 7 months ago. The night Daniel got an emergency call from the hospital where he worked as a nurse. The night I had too much wine while waiting for him and decided to crash in Rebecca's guest room rather than drive home. The night I had absolutely no memory of after my 3rd glass of Cabernet. That's impossible, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by confusion and anger. We didn't. I would never. But Nate's face told a different story. He had moved closer, looking both terrified and determined. Olivia, I'm sorry. I thought you knew. I thought you chose not to tell Daniel, and I respected that decision. But when Rebecca told me about the baby shower, about you two getting married... The room was spinning now. Guests were whispering. Some were gathering their purses, obviously eager to escape what had become the social event from hell. My mother had stood up, her protective instincts kicking in even though I was 30 years old and supposedly an adult who could handle her own crises. But I couldn't handle this one. I looked down at my swollen belly, at the life growing inside me, the life I had been talking to every night, the life Daniel and I had already named, already loved. How could this child not be part of him? How could I not remember something so monumental as being with another man? Daniel finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. Did you know? Those 3 words carried the weight of our entire relationship. Did I know I had somehow been with another man? Did I know I was carrying someone else's child? Did I know I had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible? No. I cried, my voice breaking. Daniel, I swear to you, I have no memory of anything happening with Nate. I wouldn't do that to you. I couldn't. The look on his face was one I'll never forget, a mixture of wanting desperately to believe me and the crushing reality that biology doesn't lie. If the baby was Nate's, something had happened, whether I remembered it or not. I looked at Rebecca, silently pleading for more information, for context, for anything that might make sense of this nightmare. Her expression was pure guilt. She knew. She had known all along and planned this elaborate shower anyway. How long have you known? I asked her, my voice dangerously quiet. 3 weeks, she whispered. Nate told me after you announced the due date. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, but I couldn't find the right moment. Then today, watching everyone celebrate, watching Daniel's family give you that family heirloom blanket, I just couldn't be part of the lie anymore.
Part of the lie.
As if I had been actively participating in some grand deception. As if I had chosen this chaos. My mother reached me first, putting her arm around my shoulders. We're leaving, she said firmly, glaring at Rebecca and Nate.
Now.
But Daniel blocked our path, his face contorted with pain and confusion. Is there any possibility that the baby is mine? He asked, his voice breaking on the last word. I did the mental calculation I'd already done 1,000 times during my pregnancy. Daniel and I had been actively trying for about 3 months before I got pregnant. The timing worked perfectly. Or so I thought. Yes, I insisted, clutching my belly protectively. Yes, it has to be. The timing. The timing aligns with both possibilities, Nate interrupted, looking miserable but determined to speak. I'm sorry, but it does. That was when I noticed the gift in Nate's hands, a small box wrapped in simple brown paper, not placed on the gift table with the others, but held close, as if he'd been working up the courage to present it personally. The sight of it made me sick. I couldn't breathe. The cheerful decorations seemed to be closing in on me, the faces of our friends and family morphing from celebration to scandal before my eyes. Without another word, I turned and fled, pushing past shocked guests, ignoring calls of my name. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to wake up from this horrible dream. But there was no waking up. This was real, and running away didn't change that fact. I made it to my car, a feat considering my pregnant state, and sat there, keys in hand, unsure where to go or what to do next.
Home didn't feel right.
That was where Daniel and I had painted the nursery together, where we'd assembled the crib and arranged tiny clothes. It was a shrine to a future that might now be built on a lie. A tap on my window made me jump. It was Lily, my cousin and confidant since childhood. Without a word, she opened the door, helped me slide over to the passenger seat, and took the keys from my trembling hands. My place, she said simply. You need somewhere neutral to think. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Daniel in my side mirror, standing in the parking lot, watching us leave. He looked lost, smaller somehow. It broke something inside me to see him that way. Lily's apartment was a small one-bedroom on the other side of town. She made tea I wouldn't drink and sat with me in silence for what felt like hours. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls, some from Daniel, some from my mother, dozens from Rebecca. I ignored them all. Do you really not remember anything? Lily finally asked, her voice gentle but direct. I closed my eyes, trying to recall that night 7 months ago. I remembered the dinner. Rebecca had made her famous lasagna. I remembered Daniel getting the call from the hospital. A bus accident. All hands on deck. I remembered deciding to stay rather than drive home, with Rebecca insisting I finish the bottle of wine while we caught up. After that, things got fuzzy. I remembered Nate joining us in the living room. I remembered laughing a lot. I vaguely recalled Rebecca saying she needed to make a phone call and stepping outside. Then nothing. Just waking up the next morning with a killer headache in Rebecca's guest room, driving home, and thinking nothing more of it. I was drunk, I whispered, the realization hitting me with horrifying clarity. Really drunk. But Nate wasn't. He would have known I wasn't in a state to consent to anything. Lily's face hardened. That's what I was thinking too. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. If what Rebecca said was true, and if I truly had no memory of being with Nate, then what had happened that night wasn't an affair. It was something much darker. But could I accuse Nate of something so serious based on a gap in my memory and a bombshell announcement? What if I was wrong? What if I was missing something crucial? My phone buzzed again, Daniel. This time, I answered. We need to talk, he said, his voice hoarse as if he'd been crying. Not over the phone. Can I come to you? Lily drove me back to our house after I told her about Daniel's call. She offered to stay, but this was a conversation Daniel and I needed to have alone. As I waited for him in our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, photos from happier times mocking me from every surface, I felt the baby kick, a sharp reminder of the innocent life caught in the middle of this mess. When Daniel arrived, he looked like he'd aged years in the span of hours. He sat across from me, not beside me as he normally would, and the distance felt symbolic. I spoke with Nate, he said without preamble. He claims you were coherent.
That you initiated it.
That you asked him not to tell me. The accusation stung like a physical slap. And you believe him? Over me? Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times. I don't know what to believe, Olivia. I know you wouldn't cheat on me consciously, but you were drinking that night. People do things they regret when they're drunk. Being drunk doesn't make me a different person, I argued, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. It doesn't erase 5 years of loving you faithfully, and it certainly doesn't make me suddenly attracted to my best friend's brother. We went around in circles for hours. Daniel fluctuating between wanting to believe me and needing to face what seemed like an obvious truth. Me, desperate to convince him of something I couldn't even fully verify myself. There's a simple solution, he finally said, his voice hollow. A paternity test. The words hung between us, both a lifeline and a noose. A paternity test would either save us or destroy us completely, and we would have to wait until the baby was born to know for sure. What do we do until then? I asked, exhaustion seeping into every cell of my body. Daniel looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since the shower. I don't know. I can't unhear what was said today. I can't unsee the look on Nate's face. But I also can't just walk away from you, from us, without knowing the truth. He reached across the space between us and placed his hand on my belly just as our baby, his baby, it had to be his baby, kicked against his palm. For a moment, we were connected again, the three of us, a family. But the moment was fragile, tainted by doubt and fear. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. I lay awake in our bed, replaying the day's events, trying desperately to remember that night at Rebecca's. Nothing came, just darkness where memories should be. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the front door closing. Daniel had left early for work, avoiding another painful conversation. On the kitchen counter was a note. I love you. We'll figure this out. Simple words that offered a sliver of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. I called in sick to work. No one questioned it after several guests from the shower had undoubtedly spread the story far and wide and spent the day alternating between crying and raging. By afternoon, I had enough clarity to do something productive with my anger. I called Rebecca. Can we meet? Asked when she answered on the first ring. I need to understand exactly what happened that night. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town, somewhere we wouldn't likely run into anyone we knew. When I arrived, Rebecca was already there, looking as terrible as I felt. Her eyes were swollen, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I'm so sorry, she said immediately, reaching for my hands across the table. I pulled back, not ready for forgiveness or comfort from her. I need you to tell me everything you know, I said flatly. Every detail about that night. Rebecca took a deep breath. You were pretty drunk, she began, confirming what I already knew. Daniel had been gone about an hour, and we were just talking girl stuff, nothing important. Nate came home from his evening run and joined us for a drink. And then you conveniently left us alone? I prompted, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. She had the decency to look ashamed. Jason called, my ex. I was still trying to work things out with him then. The call got heated, and I went outside to argue without an audience. I was out there for maybe 30 minutes. And when you came back? When I came back, you were both gone, she admitted. Your purse was still there, so I knew you hadn't left. Nate's bedroom door was closed. I assumed. She broke off, looking down at her untouched coffee. You assumed what, exactly? I pressed. That you were into him, she whispered. You always had a thing for him in high school. And you've been complaining about how Daniel was always working late shifts. I thought maybe. I stared at her in disbelief. So you just went to bed and left your drunk friend alone with your brother? without checking on me? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Olivia. I should have intervened. The next morning you seemed fine, hungover, but fine. You didn't mention anything, so I didn't either. I figured if it was just a one-time mistake, why ruin your relationship with Daniel over it? And when I announced I was pregnant, I did the math but told myself it had to be Daniel's, she said. Then Nate saw your ultrasound picture on my phone and asked about the due date. That's when he told me he thought the baby might be his. I've been sick about it ever since. I sat back, processing her story. Something still didn't add up. Did you actually see us together? Did Nate tell you explicitly that we had sex? Rebecca hesitated. No to the first. As for Nate, he was vague. He just said something happened and that you were into it. I filled in the blanks myself. A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. What if everyone was making assumptions? What if nothing had actually happened? I need to talk to Nate, I said firmly. Alone. Rebecca looked alarmed. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, I admitted. But it's necessary. Finding Nate proved more difficult than expected. He wasn't at his apartment or at his job. Finally, after calling every mutual friend we had, I tracked him down at a local bar, not exactly where I expected to find him at 2 in the afternoon on a weekday. He looked up as I approached his booth, his eyes widening in surprise. Olivia, he said, his speech slightly slurred. Didn't expect to see you here. We need to talk, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. About what really happened that night at Rebecca's. Nate took a long swig of his beer before answering. I already told Daniel everything. What's the point of rehashing it? The point, I said through gritted teeth, is that I have no memory of anything happening between us.
None.
And I find it very convenient that you wait until I'm 7 months pregnant and engaged to drop this bomb. He had the audacity to look offended. I thought you knew. I thought when you didn't mention it the next day, you wanted to pretend it never happened. Then when you announced the pregnancy timing, I figured you'd made your choice about who you wanted to be the father. Tell me exactly what happened, I demanded. Every detail. Nate shifted uncomfortably. We kissed, okay? You were drunk, saying things about how Daniel was never around, how you sometimes wondered if you were settling down too young. I'd just gone through my divorce and was feeling, I don't know, vulnerable. One thing led to another. And by one thing led to another, you mean we had sex? I clarified, my heart pounding. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Well, yeah.
Where?
In your room? In the guest room? On the couch? In my room, he said after a pause. And then what happened? You fell asleep. I carried you to the guest room so Rebecca wouldn't suspect anything. I leaned forward, studying his face. That's interesting, Nate. Because I woke up fully clothed in the guest room. Even my shoes were still on. He paled visibly. You must have gotten dressed before passing out. While blackout drunk? I challenged. That seems unlikely. And if we had sex, why didn't you mention protection? Why didn't you ask me about potential pregnancy concerns the next day? Nate drained his beer, his hands shaking slightly. Look, maybe I'm remembering it wrong. It was months ago. Or maybe you're lying, I said quietly. Maybe nothing happened between us at all. Maybe you made up this story for God knows what reason, and now you're trapped in it. He stood abruptly. This conversation is over. You can believe whatever you want, but DNA doesn't lie. When that baby comes, we'll all know the truth. As he stormed out, leaving me alone in the booth, I felt a strange mixture of fury and relief. His story had holes, significant ones. But would Daniel believe me over him? Would a judge, if it came to a custody battle? The next 2 months were the hardest of my life. Daniel and I existed in a painful limbo, living in the same house but emotionally worlds apart. He attended my doctor's appointments, helped assemble the remaining nursery furniture, and even held my hair back when morning sickness returned unexpectedly in my third trimester. But there was a guardedness to him, a distance that broke my heart daily. Rebecca tried repeatedly to make amends. I ignored her calls and texts, not ready to forgive her role in this mess. My mother became my fiercest defender, threatening to end Nate if he came near me again. Lily was my constant companion, the only person who didn't look at me with either pity or judgment. As my due date approached, the tension became unbearable. Daniel and I barely spoke about anything meaningful, both of us suspended in time, waiting for the DNA test that would determine our future. I caught him once, late at night, sitting in the nursery alone, holding a tiny onesie and silently crying. I backed away without letting him know I'd seen, then cried myself to sleep. Labor came 2 weeks early, a blessing, as I couldn't have endured the waiting much longer. Daniel was at work when my water broke, but he made it to the hospital in record time. Despite everything, he held my hand through every contraction, whispered encouragements as I pushed, and wept openly when our daughter finally entered the world at 3:47 a.m., screaming her tiny lungs out. "She's perfect," he whispered, counting her fingers and toes as the nurses cleaned her up. "She looks like you." For a few blissful hours, everything else fell away. We were just two people, overwhelmed with love for the tiny human we'd created. The paternity question seemed distant and unimportant in the face of her perfection. But reality came crashing back when a nurse entered with the DNA testing kit Daniel had arranged in advance. With clinical efficiency, she swabbed the inside of his cheek, then gently did the same to our daughter. The samples would be sent to a lab, with results expected in 3 to 5 business days. "We're going to get through this," Daniel promised as he drove us home from the hospital. No matter what those results say. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that our love was strong enough to weather the storm. But doubt had worked its way deep into the foundation of our relationship. Even if he was the biological father, would we ever completely trust each other again? The call came 4 days later. Daniel answered, his face impossible to read as he listened. I held our daughter. We'd named her Emma but avoided giving her a middle name, as if waiting for permission to fully claim her, and watched as my entire world hung in the balance of a phone call. When he hung up, Daniel stood motionless for what felt like eternity. Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with tears, and smiled. She's mine, he said simply. 100%. The relief was so overwhelming I nearly collapsed. Daniel rushed to my side, taking Emma from my trembling arms and cradling both of us against his chest. I'm so sorry I doubted you, he whispered into my hair. I should have known better. Through my tears, I managed to ask, How? How is this possible after what Nate said? Daniel's expression hardened. I don't know, but I intend to find out. The confrontation with Nate happened the very next day. Daniel insisted on going alone, but I refused. This was my reputation, my sanity, my life that had been upended by his lies. I deserved to be there. We left Emma with my mother and drove to Nate's apartment. He opened the door looking hungover and surprised to see us. The results came back. Daniel said without preamble, I'm Emma's father. Biologically. Care to explain your story now? Nate's face went through a series of emotions, shock, confusion, and finally, a kind of defeated resignation. He stepped aside, inviting us in. I never thought you'd actually do a test, he admitted, collapsing onto his couch. I don't know what I thought. Why? I demanded, my voice breaking. Why would you lie about something so important? Do you have any idea what you've put us through? Nate looked up, his eyes hollow. I was in love with you, Olivia. Always have been since we were kids. When you started dating Daniel, I tried to move on. Got married, built a life elsewhere. But when my marriage failed and I came back home, saw you again, those feelings came rushing back. So, you made up a story about us sleeping together? Daniel asked incredulously. That's insane. Nothing happened that night, Nate confirmed, addressing me directly. You passed out on the couch. I carried you to the guest room and left you there, fully clothed, just like you said. But when Rebecca assumed something had happened between us, I didn't correct her. I let her believe it, and when I announced my pregnancy, I pressed. I convinced myself it could be possible, he said miserably. That maybe you really were unhappy with Daniel. That maybe the baby could give us a reason to be together. It was delusional, I know that now. The room fell silent as Daniel and I processed this confession. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him feel an ounce of the pain he'd caused us. But mostly, I just felt pity. What a sad, desperate existence, to build a life on lies and wishful thinking. You need help, Nate, I said finally. Professional help. And you need to make this right. You need to tell everyone the truth. He nodded, unable to meet our eyes. I will.
I'm sorry.
For whatever it's worth, I'm truly sorry. As we left his apartment, I felt lighter than I had in months. The nightmare was over. My memory hadn't failed me. My body hadn't betrayed me. Most importantly, Daniel and I could finally move forward, together with our daughter. But healing would take time. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I started couples therapy. We learned to communicate better, to express our fears instead of letting them fester. We talked about the shower, about how quickly he had doubted me, about how that hurt lingered even after vindication. Rebecca and I eventually reconnected, though our friendship would never be quite the same. She had believed the worst of me too easily, had prioritized an explosive reveal over a private conversation. But she had also been manipulated by her brother, and I understood that family loyalty often complicates things. 6 months after Emma's birth, we finally had the wedding we'd postponed. It was smaller than originally planned, only our closest friends and family, but more meaningful for all we'd overcome. Daniel's vows made everyone cry, especially when he promised to always believe in me, to always choose trust over doubt, love over fear. As I look at my daughter now, playing in the yard of our new home, we decided a fresh start in a new place would help us leave the past behind. I still marvel at how close we came to losing everything. One lie, one moment of weakness from a man I barely thought about, nearly destroyed the life we'd built. If you're reading this, wondering about the relationships in your life, the foundations they're built on, I urge you to remember, truth always finds its way to the surface. The question isn't whether secrets will be revealed, but whether your bonds are strong enough to withstand them when they are. So, I'm asking you, what would you have done in my position? Would you have fought for your relationship like I did? Or would you have walked away at the first sign of doubt? Because sometimes the real test of love isn't avoiding hardship, it's choosing to face it together, even when it would be easier to run. Emma is calling for me now, her little voice carrying across the lawn. Daniel is laughing, spinning her in circles until they both collapse in dizzy giggles. This is my family.
Real. Whole.
Hard one. And I wouldn't change a single moment of our journey, not even the darkest parts. Because without the darkness, how would we recognize the light?